17. I am joined by Michael Gudadero, the Big Gouda. We are representing Bankster DFS. You can come find us at banksterdfs.com. $3.99 a week gets you access to everything we do, all of our articles, all of our player pools, the greatest Slack chat in the business, and we cover more than just football. We cover every major sport, niche sports, college sports, every sport that's out there. Come check us out, banksterdfs.com. If you have any questions, again, you can hit me up on Twitter at Bankster17. Gouda, I'm gonna jump right to the elephant in the room. Taysom Hill. What are we doing with Taysom Hill right now?
Yeah, that was a bit of a shock this week. We'll start with the easy side first for those of us that play on FanDuel, where Hill is listed as a tight end and not a quarterback. Which, funny enough, the Twitterverse was having some extreme backlashes on ESPN and FanDuel today with this. But that aside, if you play on FanDuel, we'll keep it very simple for your cash games. Taysom Hill is in there, and don't even think twice about it. Minimum priced tight end, only $4,500, and pretty easy to assume he's going to be the highest scoring tight end of the week, or at least top 2 scoring tight end of the week. And at that price, on a point per dollar basis, he's going to be clearly the number one value there. If you are playing FanDuel and you're building multiple lineups, yeah, maybe if you're building over 20 lineups and you decide 10% of your lineups you won't have Taysom Hill in there just because if something happens, if he totally craps the bed, if he turns it over 3 times, if a fluke injury happens, something like that where he only puts up 5 points and now you have another tight end in your lineup that is putting up 15, then yes, if you're building a lot of lineups, definitely consider using somebody else for maybe 10 to 15%. Other than that, it's cut and dry Taysom Hill on FanDuel. Don't even think about it. On DraftKings, it's a little bit more of a conversation. On DraftKings, he is a very good value at $4,800 at quarterback. And for cash games, I think you need to give very strong consideration for him and what he will provide to you, not only running one of the best offenses in the NFL, one of the better offenses of the past decade. So I think on cash games, he's a very, very strong consideration. And I'm not going to use the word lock. I don't think he's a lock necessarily, but I do have him in my cash game lineup. And I think come Sunday, that's the way ultimately I will end it, with him in there, because he just opens up so much with that value. And quite frankly, if you're going down at other positions for value, you take a little risk. There's no guarantee of the work. At least at quarterback, when you get that value, there's no guarantee of the results. But we know what the workload is going to be. We know they're going to work Hill in with some running attempts. I'm assuming he's going to get at least 5 to 6 rushing attempts and design plays on that. He's going to throw the ball 20 to 25 times at least. They paid good money to keep him around this offseason. Even though they did sign Winston, it's clear that Hill is going to be the guy there, and that they are, they're really looking into the future with this as well. So I'm pretty confident in him. From a GPP standpoint, I think you will need exposure to Hill also, but at that level, I think we temper the expectations a little bit. The GPP end, I don't know how explosive he might be or what this offense might look like. We all become enamored when Peyton uses him, when Breeze is in there, when it's high-scoring games, when Hill is doing all this fun stuff. But what is it going to look like with him out there for 60 minutes for every snap? Does he still have that same explosiveness? Is he going to be, that same reckless abandon guy running into 3 defenders type of thing? Or is he going to cut his style back a little bit? Is this going to affect his style of play? What type of passer is he really? We really only see trick plays. We don't see much of, 3-step drops and throwing a slant over the middle of the Michael Thomas type of thing. So it's going to be very interesting to see where he is. Ownership on him will be very interesting in GPPs. He could be as low as 20%. He could be as high as 50%. It's really going to be, kind of a crapshoot. So I think on the GPPs, lower your expectations a little bit from that standpoint, and how much exposure you do have to him, and just try to make we always try to make the right decisions, but I think if you keep your ownership on Hill under what the field is going to look like, I think that's the proper thing to do this week, and not get too crazy on him, at least for tournaments.
I think I like everything you said about that. I do think the ultimate leverage player this week is any tight end not named Taysom Hill on FanDuel in a GPP. In a cash game, obviously I'm 100% Hill on FanDuel, but in a GPP, I'm going to be way under the field on Taysom Hill on FanDuel, and I think that's the way to go. I think if you really want to, double down and go super crazy, you go with Jared Cook as your tight end. I mean, no one's going to play Cook this week. So I do think there's a lot of leverage to be had, but it's really hard to not double stack, or if you're doing super flex on FanDuel, triple stack, like that's ridiculous. But I don't know if I trust Sean Payton. I don't know if I trust that Jameis Winston won't see the field. And so I'm just not sure I'm ready to play him in cash on DraftKings. I've wavered back and forth on if I'm even going to put him in the cash game player pool, which if we're going to pull that up, which I am pulling it up right now, he's in the cash game player pool now. The cash game player pool, and this is our cash game player pool. We're running this, our live stream tonight, the Friday kickoff show. We're going to run a bit different. We're going to talk about our cash pool, show kind of what a lineup can look like, go through our cash plays, see if we missed anybody. Because this is probably the first time Gouda's seen this, because I've been revamping it up until we went live, so I could get his true look. So we're going to kind of look at that. And so he's in the pool now, and I don't know if he'll stay there for me. He's not in my current cash game lineup. So we're going to go through this cash game, through the cash pool right now. We'll move into GPPs later on in the show. But we want to separate the show out between cash and GPP. So we're going to talk cash first, since that's what we focus on at Bankster a lot. It's where we build our bankroll through cash. We believe in the 80-20 model. We've really made a push on cash lately, and it's been very successful for members. And I've noticed, Gouda too, the more people have been focusing on their cash game lineups, the more GPPs we've been hitting within our membership, because the bankroll's there. They're able to take those shots, and they're able to see where the ownership is and play the leverage game, which, again, we'll talk about a little more when we get to the GPP side. But I think the first thing we should do is work on building a strong cash pool. Right now, I've got Deshaun Watson in as my cash game quarterback. I just think his floor is super high. If you take out last week's win game, he's been putting up 25-plus points since Bill O'Brien got fired. He's thrown for 300 yards. He's rushing a lot more every game since O'Brien got fired. New England's defense isn't as good as it used to be. So I think Deshaun Watson right now is the safest. I think he's pretty safe. I mean, he's real safe. And when you look at his price point at only $6,500 to me, he's a $7,300 quarterback. So I feel like we're getting a little discount on Watson. And as I wrote my article this week, I skipped over him first. He wasn't even in my initial cash pool because I didn't see him, because I was looking up for where Deshaun Watson would normally be. And it's like I was skipping around. And I like to go down towards the cheaper end, the Burrow. I really like Burrow, and I still do. And I saw Cam at 62 and the high rushing floor, but then I finally saw Watson at 65. I'm like, $300 more than Cam for what Watson can do. I do think Cam's still in the pool because of his high rushing floor. He's got the 9 rushing TDs, but he's only got 3 passing TDs this year. He only has 3 games where he's thrown 1 TD each, and he's got the rest of his games with 0 passing TDs. Whereas Watson has only the 1 rushing TD, but he passes a ton. He more than half his games, he has 2 or more passing touchdowns. He throws for 300 yards. I just think for $300 more, and it's the same game, I do think Deshaun Watson's the safer play. If we take Taysom Hill out of the equation, because you've talked about him, and I understand where the thought is, and I'm going to play around with lineups with Taysom Hill in it to see where's your head at otherwise for cash game quarterbacks. Who else is in your consideration? Am I missing someone in my pool? Should I pull someone out of my pool? Where are we at for cash?
No, quarterback is extremely simple for me this week. Really, I had considered Newton, but when I dug deeper, a lot of what you found, it totally took me away from him. Earlier in the week, I was a little intrigued by Herbert, but I just think there's too many routes where he fails just on a value standpoint at his price point than anything else. So really, this week it just comes down to Watson or Taysom Hill for me. And looking at, the reason that I came off of Cam Newton was actually digging into Jacoby Myers, which we can touch on a little bit later. But since week 7, Jacoby Myers has 35 targets. The rest of the Patriots team combined has 46 targets. So if you basically need Jacoby Myers to have a big game for Cam to do anything. outside of his potential rushing floor, which even that isn't going to get him the value. He's still going to need to pass. So, and with Bradley Roby on the defensive side back for the Texans, he's not the best corner in the world, but he's been decent enough this year to slow down opposing number one receivers. If that happens, Newton's pass game is totally out the window. But Deshaun Watson, on the other hand, with where his price point is, and we want to get him to 3x, he's done that in 6 of his 9 starts this year. And if you take out, last week's game where I don't think, anybody was going to be passing in that type of game, regardless of who, even Patrick Mahomes would have probably had a bad game. He's reached that value in 6 of the 8 games that, he started aside from last week. And, again, for comparison's sake, the 2 games that not reached that value was week 2 against Baltimore when he was home, when he still put up a respectable 15.7 points. And then the following week at Pittsburgh, which is, again, one of the better defenses in the NFL, he put up 18 points. He only missed 3x by about 2 points even in that one. So he's been there or extremely close. So I think at quarterback, it's Watson or Hill. I think that's what it comes down to, and it's just a matter of what you're looking to use elsewhere, or if you really need that savings, or if you have some stronger conviction with some other value guys that you feel confident paying up at quarterback a bit.
And with the quarterback too, 3x. I try to look closer to 3.5 to 4x because generally we're not going to get 3x out of our defense, so we got to make up those points somewhere to get to that 150. And so that's where I'm starting to really look Watson above Taysom Hill, because I just feel that there is a path for Watson to get to 3 and 4x, which is 26. Mm-hmm. He needs 26 points to get to 4x. So, he just needs to get to 23 points or so to get to 3.5x, which he's done every week since Bill fired, except for the win game last week, where he was still fairly respectable. I mean, he ran 8 times, so I'll take that. I guess a pretty decent Cleveland defense. So I just think that's where I'm going with why I'm going Watson over that. And when you get the 3.5 to 4x and you want to make up the difference, that's where I'm really going to fall short, because, one of the reasons we love Kyler Murray is because you're getting an RB1, like a low end RB1 and a QB1. That's why Kyler Murray is such a great cash option most weeks. Deshaun Watson's in a similar mold. Lamar Jackson was there last year, but you're not getting that out of Cam Newton. Cam Newton, you're getting a low end RB1, but you're not getting a QB1. You're getting a low end QB2 or a non-play at QB. I mean, he doesn't even throw for 200 yards most weeks. It's a problem with Newton. I do think the one name that we didn't talk too much about was Joe Burrow. I like Burrow simply because the volume that he's going to get. He's going to get 35 to 40 attempts because they do every single week. I mean, he's been at 37 attempts. If I'm not mistaken, it's 36 attempts every week but one. And that one week he had 30. When he puts the ball in the end zone, which he's been doing more frequently lately, he's getting close to that 4x value. Should be 22 points. If he's at 20 points, I'm happy. Even 18 points is not going to kill us here, and he generally gets that. Now, Washington's a real interesting defense. They put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and Joe Burrow does not play well under pressure. Last week, I believe he had 14 pass attempts under pressure, and he completed 0 of those 14 attempts, which is terrible. But if you check out what Washington's done, they've also given up 300 yards passing. I believe it's 5 out of the last 6 games, 4 out of the last 6 games. They've given up a ton of pass yards. So while I really like the Washington football defense, and I actually think they're a pretty good play this week, they're one of my cash options, I do also think that they do give up a lot of the passing yards. I just want to pull that stat up real quick here. If you check the game log, is it not Washington? I must be thinking of a different team about giving up those teams. It's not Washington, so maybe I'm wrong with that. Okay, this is what we get. This is what we get the big bucks here, folks. But they did give up a lot of yards to Stafford last week. I do just think the volume's there with Burrow. I got to figure out which team it was that gave up all those passing yards, because it was a great stat. I don't remember which one it was. The one thing we do have to worry about with Washington, though, the point I was getting to, is they don't give up a lot of points to receivers. They've only given up 2 wide receiver touchdowns this year and 0 100-yard games to wide receivers. So we do want to be careful with the stacking of Burrow, and ultimately that's where I fell short. And maybe that's why I pulled him from line, because when I did the research, it was the wrong team I had the stat on. Because Washington does put a lot of pressure, and they're not giving up a ton of passing yards. I really need to find out which team it was that I had that stat on then. But Burrow, I just think the volume's there, and at $500, he's in play when it comes down to it. I agree with Gouda. You're dealing with the two main quarterbacks of Watson, but because again, I do think there's playability with those two guys there, but Watson and Hill are going to be the guys that when all's said and done, I go and bold my preferred plays. They're going to get bolded as the plays we really need to spend our time looking. Going to the running back position, I think the first play that we're bolding in, and I don't think anyone's going to argue about that, is Dalvin Cook this week. Are we in agreement, Gouda, that he is a slam dunk, no-brainer, got game play?
You said Dalvin Cook?
I did.
Yeah. You broke up a little bit. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. Oh, yeah. 100%. 100%. Dalvin Cook's the number one running back play on the board, the top guy, whatever you want to call it. Yes, he's easily the top running back play. Yeah,
I agree with that. Now, and I have Kamara listed in my cash core currently, and if we come over here to the cash lineup, I start to build my core here. He's there for me simply because, and I've done this a few times this year, where I take this high volume, I get a little too cute, and I pull him out of my lineup to try to go with a guy who's a little bit cheaper, who's maybe a backup starting, like a Mike Davis type or a Gio Bernard type, and then try to spend up at a different position. And it's kind of bit me in the butt a lot this year. And so I'm a little concerned about pulling Kamara, but I'm also concerned that he's going to lose goal line carries now because Taysom Hill likes to run. Sean Payton is enamored with Taysom Hill. But boy, last week, Kamara popped those 3 touchdowns, and it's like, probably should have had him in my lineup. And so I'm a little gun shy with pulling Alvin Kamara, especially now with Christian McCaffrey not playing. I don't love Mike Davis simply because Curtis Samuel's getting some of the work. I do have him in the cash pool, Davis, because I respect the matchup for him. I think it's a good matchup. But I also have him listed as bad chalk because I do think people will be kind of into him, especially now with DeAndre Swift not playing this week. And Swift was such a slam dunk cash game play this week. It makes me sick that he can't play, but I'm not into Peterson, and I'm surely not into Kerryon Johnson. Like I'm just off the running backs. You might be different than me.
Well, so I wouldn't say I'm exactly into Peterson, but I think the conversation on that has to become, well, if we liked DeAndre Swift and we think it was a strong matchup there, and we say, all right, well, Peterson still has that same strong matchup, and he's only 4,000. So we're looking for, 12 points?
We are.
Essentially. So
60 yards and a touchdown.
Exactly. So, it's always hard to take into account, a touchdown. But if this is going to be a game where it should be relatively close because, well, for one, Carolina is probably going to have P.J. Walker starting, and who the hell knows what that offense is going to look like with him running it. So if this game is close, then we factor in, Detroit also is going to be pretty shorthanded offensively. Galladay and Amendola are both ruled out, so the receiving core is down 2 of their top 3 guys. And Stafford is playing with some torn ligaments in his thumb. So does that mean that maybe they're going to try to run it a little more, try to keep Stafford from doing a little less there? So I think Peterson, to just kind of shove away in a sense, I think is a bad quick reaction to it. Again, he's not, a minimum price guy that everybody's throwing in their lineup like Mike Davis was last week because Davis was getting all of the usage. And listen, there's a lot of ways that Peterson fails this week and doesn't get anything, for his value. But I do think that he's somebody that you need to consider if you feel confident enough that he'll get enough touches. And if you like the matchup with Swift, well, again, why can't Peterson do it at, a substantial discount?
It's the passing game work for me. But I understand what you're saying because he doesn't need the passing game work to hit value on 4K. He needs, Hook has chimed in with that as well. A lot of T equity, and there is. And
that's going to be the thing, too. Peterson will get the goal line work. So, even in that, again, it's a fluky thing, but could Peterson end the day with 15 yards and 2 touchdowns? He could. It's highly unlikely, but there's also that end of it because he's more likely than not going to get the goal line work as well. So there's a couple of paths there. And again, at such a cheap price, it's worth at least consideration if you need that savings and you don't want to use some of the value with the wide receivers, for instance.
So does Adrian Peterson become the 2020 version of Jerome Bettis, late career Jerome Bettis, or my old buddy back in the day? We used to call him Plumpy Lendale White, Plumpy Lendale White, who would just fall into the end zone. Listen, I'm adding him to the pool because I do think there's an argument to be made at 4K. It's gross, but as we see, building lineups now my lineup was locked. My cash game lineup was so locked in, and then the Swift news came out, and now I'm starting to waver a little on Kamara, though I still have him locked in there. It's a lot easier to stomach that 9,200 if you put Peterson in there too. It's interesting. And when you look at the rest of the names on this list, and I listen, Derrick Henry, I always struggle with in cash because he doesn't catch any passes. And every week when I say he doesn't catch passes, he goes out and gets 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then those passes don't matter. And really the way you get the Ravens is you beat them on the ground. They've given up 112 more yards on the ground 3 of the last 4 weeks. And no, I don't need to check that stat. I actually know one is correct because I checked it right before we went on the air. And Tennessee's going to try to run the football. And so there's a part of me that, and I pulled the lineup together, and I think it's doable this week. Kamara, Cook, and Henry, and just saying YOLO and run with the high-end running backs because there's so much value at wide receiver this week as we start to look down that list when we get there. There's a lot of value down here, and there's more than what I listed. I wrote a whole section in my article with like 7 wide receivers under $4,900 that can really help out. Because look, Mike Davis, I can't call him a preferred play. Kalen Ballage, I mean, if we take the name out, and one of the things I need to do, and we all need to do, is take the name out of the equation. What Kalen Ballage has done the last 2 weeks is he's come in and he has gotten a ton of work against an awful, and this week he's got an awful Jets defense is it a revenge game? Does he want revenge against Gase? I mean, Gase has shown nothing love to Ballage. Well, why would he? Gase loves him. Gase loves Kalen Ballage the way Sean Payton loves Taysom Hill. But
to your point with the name, I mean, like you were saying, if you take the name away and you tell me, all right, you're gonna have a running back at $5,600 that last week he got 73% of the snaps, 78% of all the running back usage, which included 6 targets. You wouldn't even think twice about putting him in your lineup, but because it's Kalen Ballage, we have that. Oh crap! It's Kalen Ballage. I don't want to use him.
I mean, he had 15 points last week without going over 70 yards. Either rushing or receiving or scoring a touchdown. He puts one in the end zone. You're talking almost 4x. I'm not going to say he's a preferred cash game play, but I am saying he's locked into my pool and he's strongly in consideration. And as I sent you and Sean a message earlier today, oh my God, Kalen Ballage is in my current iteration of my cash game lineup. I don't think I'm okay, but you wrote about him in your leverage play article too. Guys, you can check that out at DFS.com. Gouda wrote about him as a GPP leverage play after he finished throwing up, as we all do when we talk about Kalen Ballage. But I think that's a play we got to consider. I think Gio Bernard is in play because when starts, he plays really well. He scored over 20 points, 2 of the 3 starts he's had this year. I think Washington's a team that I think this game's got a sneaky shootout potential, Washington and Cincinnati. And I think Gio's going to be very involved. I don't think we're going to see the kind of work you saw last week when Pittsburgh just blew out Cincinnati. And I think J.D. McKissic is in play. McKissic has had 14-plus targets in back-to-back weeks. He's getting there on receptions alone. And one of the stats that's out there that you may or may not hear all the time, but Seidenfeld talks about it all the time. And I don't know where the number comes from, but you trust the guy who's made a couple $1 million in the industry. Running back target is 2.7 carries. So if you think about that from McKissick's standpoint, if he gets 10 targets, it's like getting 20. That's like the same value as 27 carries, which makes some sense because a target leads to a better chance of a reception. If he gets a reception, that's worth a point, whereas a carry is no guarantee of points. So I understand the concept behind that. And McKissick sees such a high volume of targets that he's going to have to that he can pay off. And if this game does become more of a shootout, McKissick's going to play in the passing situations because as you wrote or you showed us last week and you talked about in our Slack chat, Aguda, Antonio Gibson can't pass block. He's the worst pass blocking running back in the NFL, and McKissick's a really good pass blocker. And Alex Smith looks for McKissick. He trusts McKissick, and he takes shots downfield with McKissick. I don't know if you know this. They used to talk about this every game when McKissick played for the Seahawks. He was a wide receiver in college. And so he knows how to run routes. He knows how to get off his break, and he knows how to go downfield. I do think he's strongly in play. And at some point, every single one of these names in the running back cash pool has been in my cash game lineup, different as I'm continuing to put it together, which will make for a fun video when I put it to my cash game video tomorrow. It's going to be an interesting video because there's so many options now with DeAndre Swift not playing. Am I missing anyone? Should I be bolding anyone? Is there anyone here that you're just totally locked in on, or that I'm missing that needs to go into the pool before we move on to wide receiver?
Yeah, so one guy actually that you don't have in there that I do prefer, I actually prefer him over Gio Bernard is Duke Johnson. Again, I think that he's going to get all the work. He got the majority of the work last week. He only got one target. Again, it was I'm just going to kind of throw out last week and make the assumption that one target was just that wind game and just the weather being so bad that that just wasn't the opportunity. He still got 14 carries. Like I said, he was out there for the majority of the snaps, and I think his output and his production, you're looking more like what he did week 9 when he took over for David Johnson earlier in the game after the concussion. I think that's more of what you can expect in this one. And again, the Pats offense, nothing to write home about. Duke is he's game flow proof. He's going to be out there whether they're up or they're down. And I still think at least 15 touches is going to be more than reasonable for him. And I just prefer that there to Gio Bernard. Gio's been losing a little bit of the touches to P. Ryan and one of the other backs on the roster. I forget his name at the moment. But so that's a little concerning there. After Gio was essentially the lock button once Mixon went down because he was getting all the usage. That's kind of changed the past 2 games with them. And listen, it could go straight back to that. Maybe they were just giving Gio a little bit of a breather, and just kind of how it worked out. He lost some touches because of it. But I just think in that price range, I do prefer Duke Johnson there for cash purposes. I mean, there's a lot of guys in that range from that $5,800 range that down to $5,200 where McKissick is. That are viable guys this week, not necessarily for cash, but like just GPPs in general. But I think on the cash end, it kind of comes down to Duke or Gio Bernard, and I happen to be on the Duke side in this one.
I think if your choices, I'd probably rather just go to McKissick. Honestly, I just like the target volume. But I get what you're saying about Duke. I've never been a Duke Johnson guy. I just don't see it. I mean, I get that the volume's there. I don't know. Plus, if I'm using Watson as my quarterback, I'm not sure I want running back from that same team.
Well, that's the difference there too. I mean, if you're using Watson, I'm not using Duke Johnson with Watson in a cash lineup. But if you're going elsewhere, if you happen to use Newton, or if you go Burrow, or you go down the hill, then Duke gives you some salary savings, but still, you're in that mid range, or you're not, just punting 2 spots to get other studs in elsewhere.
Makes sense. I get you. I get the Duke Johnson thing, and I know a lot of people are on Duke this week. I think, yes, if you're not using Watson, I think he makes a lot more sense. So Big Matt asked a quick question, and it leads us into our wide receiver conversation. If we're going Watson instead of Cam, is it having Myers to have a piece of that game? Currently, he's got Grant, Deontay, and Pittman. Grant. Oh, Jakeem Grant. Jakeem Grant. Jakeem Grant, Deontay Johnson, and Pittman. I don't think you need to have. I don't think you need to have Myers in that. If you're going with Watson, I don't think you need Myers. I understand it's a good correlation if you're going to enter it into a GPP, which you should enter your cash game lineup into a GPP. But I also don't think it's. I don't think it's a requirement. I prefer Deontay Johnson in that respect. I like Pittman a lot. And if Roby shuts down Myers, you're kind of screwed there. I think you're better off with where you're at, quite honestly. Good, did you feel differently, the same?
No, I feel the same. I don't think you need to use Myers just to have a piece of that game. He's definitely cash viable if you feel he's the best option in that price range, but I don't think he's a necessity to have in there this week either.
Yeah, and I do think as we talk about cash game wide receivers, there's a lot of cash game wide receivers at the lower end. I'm not spending up terribly much at receiver. I do think if you're going to spend up, it should be for Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin. I think the matchup's great for both of them. I do think Keenan Allen, if you can fit him in, is real good, but his price is starting to creep into that territory where last week's game kind of scared me a little bit on Keenan Allen. Not to the point where I'm not going to use him, especially because he's going to be facing the Jets. But especially if you want to spend up at both running back or 3 running back spots, or even 2 of them, it's going to be hard to fit Keenan Allen in. And I generally tend to go running backs over receivers. Though I've played around with lineups with Keenan Allen. If we go like Cook with, let's say, Peterson and Ballage, I won't put Ballage with Allen, but even if you go Cook with Peterson and McKissick or Duke or Gio or someone, like, you definitely can get up. You should be doing that to get to Keenan Allen. Like, if you're not using Keenan Allen in that respect, why are we spending down at the running back position? Same with McLaurin. Terry McLaurin's just a beast. He's amazing, and he's going to see the target volume, seeing 10 targets every single week, catching 7 passes a week. A good matchup against Cincinnati, who, cornerbacks are hurt. They're not a great pass defense. And I do think you can throw on them. We'll see when we get to the GPP section. Pittsburgh's an interesting one because I've been railing against Chase Claypool as a cash game play, but he's got 9 or more targets 3 straight weeks, and Pittsburgh loves him. He seems like the real deal, high upside guy. But now he's getting the volume too. I think he's a pretty safe play against a bad Jaguars defense. But Deontay Johnson's going to get his 10 targets too. He's played 5 full games this year and has 10 or more targets in every single one of them, and he's $200 cheaper. So, I've not done a lineup that had Chase Claypool in cash, but I do recognize that he's a cash play. I do think Brandon Cooks is in play. He's had 8 or more targets every single game since O'Brien was fired. He's been putting up 15 or more fantasy points in all but one game, and that was, I think, last week's win game. I mean, Cooks has been outstanding, and he's $5,200, which is pretty cheap considering how well Cooks has been playing, especially if he doesn't see Gilmore. If Gilmore plays with Fuller, it's going to leave a lot of opportunity for Cooks. And then there's just a ton of lower end wide receivers with Myers and Pittman and Grant and Hamler and Conley. I think they're all viable for some reasons. Conley's a little bit wild on that, but he has seen targets in back-to-back weeks, and Chenault has already been ruled out this week. Hamler's seen 10 targets in back weeks. Grant has only seen 5 targets each of the last 2 weeks, but he's just a little jitterbug. I mean, dude, he gets open and he could take 160, and he's cheap. Pittman seems to be emerging as the new wide receiver 1 in Indianapolis, and we've just talked about how Myers is the wide receiver 1 in New England, and has just seen a boatload of targets. I really like Pittman. I've got Pittman is a bold guy for me right now, and he's pretty much locked in for me. But again, that depends upon where else I have to look. But I've always found I've spent to that level, that 4,500 range, for at least one spot this week. So Pittman's kind of locked in for me. What's your thought on wide receivers, Gouda? Because that's a lot of wide receivers, and you might find someone that you like differently, or is there someone from this list that really stands out to you?
Yeah, so the biggest standout to me is Deontay Johnson. He's the consistency on the double-digit targets, the games that he's actually finishing when he's not getting hurt. I mean, he's just been off the chart this year. He's to me, he's the clear number 1 in that offense. And you keep hearing comparisons with his skill set and just the way that he plays and the way that Roethlisberger uses him to Antonio Brown. I'm not saying by any stretch that he's there or he's going to get to that point of where Brown was at his peak, but if a guy like Roethlisberger has enough confidence to consistently feed Johnson double-digit targets every time he's in the lineup, I think that kind of says all you need to know there. Like the old expression, actions speak louder than words. Well, that's exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing the actions show up in that box score for Johnson and Roethlisberger every week. So that I think that goes a long way. And and one of the bigger decisions I've been trying to figure out with wide receiver, 2 things really. It's the value part, and I'm talking about really the lower end value, and namely either Jakeem Grant or actually Michael Gallup. I think at his price point at 3,700. Even though there is going to be a lot of mouths to feed there and everything, I just think at 3,700, it's just such a low risk play that even if he doesn't do that much, or even if he gives you 7 points, you're still getting 2x on that $3,700. It's not really torpedoing your lineup. And we've seen, all it takes, either is one big play, which he's been, a big play guy for them, or even just for whatever reason, Dalton just locks in on him if that happens, or sometimes quarterbacks lock in on a guy if they can just exploit the matchup early on. You could see that. And I lean Gallup a little more than Grant just because of what the matchup brings. Like, it's almost, if you look at Vikings being 7-point favorites, Cowboys being on the road, where their defense is and everything, it's more likely than not Dalton's throwing probably 35 times this game, if not more. If that happens, Gallup's probably seeing 5 to 6 targets, can easily pay off that 3,700. On Grant's side, I worry a little bit, one, about the West Coast trip and the altitude and everything, and those spots are a little difficult sometimes for rookie quarterbacks to play in. And, the volume hasn't really been there for Tua yet, and they haven't needed it. The Dolphins have been playing so well. Their defense has been strong that they just haven't thrown it that much. Now, Grant has taken a nice role since Preston Williams went down, and he had a very nice game last week. But, to say that could continue or will continue on a low-volume passing game, it may not. And then you get into that issue where, because we know that the Broncos probably are not scoring a lot, especially if Drew Lock is not playing. So now, all right, if the Dolphins' defense plays well, the Broncos only put up 10 points. Well, what do the Dolphins really need to do in their passing game? So you could just fall victim to that low volume where Grant doesn't do much for you. But again, at the same token, 3,500, if he gets you 7 points, which is 4 catches for 30 yards or 3 catches for 40 yards, again, it's not killing you. So I think whichever way you go, at least in my my decision on Gallup versus Grant, I think either way you go, it's not going to kill your lineup. I think there's a little bit of an easier path for Gallup to get to 3 to 4x, but I don't think either guy, if you choose to spend down at receiver like that, I don't think either guy is going to kill you. And probably at the end of the day, they'll end up towards similar point totals.
Yeah, part of my concern with Gallup was simply because I feel like Dalton, when he played, tended to favor Cooper a little bit more.
Yeah.
Gallup has gotten a ton of targets recently, though, and he's gotten a ton of targets pretty much all year. They just haven't really connected much with him, and they're going to keep taking shots. He was one of the other receivers I included in that list of 7 where I wrote up all the value receivers. Ultimately, I decided I wasn't looking to use him, especially when you realize Cooper's only $5,400, which I don't love him for cash, but we'll talk about him for GPP leverage. I do like Cooper a lot in GPPs, but I do think Gallup is definitely within that conversation. I do. As we continue to build lineups, I think what you're going to find is either you're going to go a couple of high-end running backs, one mid-range receiver like Johnson, and a couple of the lower-end receivers, or you're going to find a couple of value guys at receiver, spend for Allen and McLaurin, and then pick, again, one of those lower-end guys. I think that's where these builds are coming up, because moving on to tight end, and I don't want to spend a ton of time there, you're just not going to spend a lot of money on tight end. Hunter Henry and Hayden Hurst are in the $4,600 range. They're playable, but I don't think they're so much better than Dallas Goedert or Logan Thomas. Though Goddard's starting to become a little bit of concern just because there's some weather issues in Cleveland again this week. I do think that is what's Logan Thomas done that's made us not want to spend $3,300 on Logan Thomas. 6 targets a game. Smith has taken over. Still gets a lot of red zone targets and end zone targets. Hasn't converted many of them, but catch rate is decent. Again, it's creeping up to respectability. He's gone over 10 points, which is all he needs. 3 of the last 4 weeks. Has one of the higher ADOTs for tight ends, so he's getting some bigger plays. As you see, 25 or more pass play, 3 of the last 4 weeks. And he's highly athletic, former quarterback. I mean, the guy can play, and he's a big body dude, and Alex Smith seems to like him. The volume's been there. I mean, he's quickly becoming a cash core play. And the only reason I'm hesitant to really lock him in as a cash core because I just don't love the idea of stacking Logan Thomas with McLaurin, with McKissick. I mean, there's a lot of Washington players that I'm interested in, but the one that is going to end up most likely in my lineup is going to be Thomas. I mean, as you sort of there, he was there in the first build that we had put together, logging in. So I just don't see the need to spend up at tight end this week. It's a real bad week for tight ends. And so for me, Logan Thomas is the preferred play on DraftKings. Obviously, we talked about prior to, looking at this core, that Taysom Hill was the slam dunk, lock it in. You're playing him and nobody else on FanDuel Cash, and I think that's the way it has to be. But I just don't know why I would look elsewhere. Maybe Tyler Eifert, Pittsburgh's really good tight ends, but Eifert at 27 is going to get about 5 targets as he does every week. And I'm thinking about perhaps putting him in the pool. But if I have the $500-600, whatever it is, I'm just going to move up to Thomas. So I think he's a far more athletic play than Eifert and has a better chance to score. Eifert will score 3 touchdowns now, but that's how it always is. But I think that's where we have to be. I think the way that the builds are coming up this week, there's value to be had, but I don't think we need that value to spend up for a Mark Andrews type at time. Do you see that differently at all, Gouda?
Slightly. So I had Goddard and Hooper in consideration, but I've just kind of tossed them out.
I feel the same.
Not that into it. I actually hadn't heard about the weather issues, but that'll definitely make it worse again with the last Cleveland game went.
It's not as windy, but there should be some heavy precipitation, and I just got rid of the DraftKings. Anyway.
But yeah, so for me, actually, in cash now, it comes down to either Thomas or actually TJ Hawkinson. Again, going back to with Amendola and Galladay out, Stafford doesn't throw it down the field as much, which potentially gives Hawkinson some extra opportunities. No DeAndre Swift in there, so that maybe hurts some of that takes away maybe some checkdowns, which again could help Hawkinson. And also, too, the Stafford thumb injury. If the thumb injury affects Stafford from really throwing it down the field and it's more short to intermediate routes, that's right up Hawkinson's wheelhouse. And also, too, last week was the first game that Hawkinson did not have either 50 yards or a touchdown. And, in a year that has been really, really, really bad for tight ends, Hawkinson hasn't been great, but he's been consistent. He's got, in every game this year, except for last week, he's over 9 points in every game. There's only 3 games this year that he hasn't reached double-digit points. And again, at a price point of $4,200, it's $900 more than where Logan Thomas is. But it's a cheap spot. It's affordable. And, if he continues the output that he's had all year, he's definitely not torpedoing your lineups, and he's going to give you the opportunity to get the 3 to 4x as well, which is kind of the key area that we look for. And it's definitely doable with where the value is elsewhere this week, I feel.
I see that with TJ Hawkinson. He's definitely. I see that Q tag next to people, and I get a little nervous throwing him in a cash game lineup because then I gotta play with things. But if he's cleared to play and he's good to go, he's the cheapest he's been since week 1. And he's been coming close to paying off his $5K price tag, $4,200. Not that bad. It's not that bad. I see it. I don't want to spend a ton of time on defense. So if you see something that you like on defense, let me know. But I spend down, and so it's Falcons for me. It was Falcons when Jameis Winston was starting for New Orleans, or so we thought. It's still the Falcons now. Taysom Hill's completed 11 passes in his career. Alex Smith completed 17 passes in 1 drive last week. The dude is very inexperienced, and he's not shown the ability to make great decisions all the time. I'm not changing that at all. We don't spend up on defense anyway. We're not dropping 4K on Pittsburgh or anything like that. So I'd rather spend money on real players, and there's a lot of decisions to make this week. Even 2,300. I mean, the Jets are $2,000, and I don't love them. And they've gone negative each of the last 2 weeks. But I'd rather play them than spend up on defense. Do you have a differing perspective, or are we still spending down at defense?
No, spending down. I have no need to spend up in cash. I'll either end up on the Falcons or the Broncos this week.
Broncos seems to be the other defense I would focus on simply because they get to the quarterback. That's the if we got $100, they're definitely in play. All right, that's it for cash. So as we look at our cash, this is where we're at as of. I like to update that for the team. This is now Friday at 7:45 p.m. Eastern. This is where cash pool's at. It evolves, guys. It evolves. And if you're a member of Bankster DFS, at banksterdfs.com for just $4 a week, under $4 a week, which you get access to everything. This will evolve throughout the course of the weekend. But this is where we're at right now. And I think if we're picking from this pool, you know, you're going to put yourself in a real position for cash, especially if you focus on those bold plays and kind of move on from there. I think you're going to be in a really good spot this week. I love it. I love where we're at for cash. Let me just bold these Falcons because we are kind of locked in on Atlanta for defense. And that's how the cash pool works for those members of Bankster DFS. Get a play early in the week, and I update as the week goes on. Moving on to GPPs. So we're talking about tournaments. It's way different from cash. So when we're playing cash games, in cash games we mean double ups, triple ups, anything that pays out 30%, 35% or more of the cash pool, 40% more of the pool. You want a high floor. You want the path to not get zeros. You want that floor. GPPs, I'm not as worried about popping a zero if it's a guy who has an upside to get 6x on their salary. We're trying to win the tournament. We want to win all the money. And how are we going to do that? We're going to stack big games. We're going to find leverage plays, and we're going to try to get plays that people aren't playing, high upside plays that other people aren't playing. So this week thus far, Gouda hasn't at this yet. So we're he's going to throw some ideas in here. But we're not going to spend an hour on this either because, we are way focused on cash, and cash is where it's at. But we're going to talk about some teams in some areas where we think we can get some upside, some points, high point totals, and where maybe we can leverage the field with some superstar type players who I think might go under-owned this week. And that's what we have to do with GPPs. One of the things that Gouda and I talked about prior to getting on the air was that there's no lockdown cash GPP game this week where like Seattle, Arizona would have been or had been a few weeks ago. Basically any Seattle game this year where just everyone's stacking both sides of that game and it's going to have crazy ownership. That's not there this week. I do think we're going to see a lot of ownership on the Atlanta New Orleans game. I think you'll get some on the Detroit Carolina game. Pittsburgh should be a really high owned stack. And the Chargers will probably be pretty popular this week, and maybe Minnesota running game against Dallas. But I do think that leaves us a lot of opportunity this week. And the first stack that I this week was the Baltimore Ravens going up against the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee, it's a pass fun offense. They are trying to stop the run. They're daring you to pass, and teams have passed against them a lot this year and put up big points against them in the passing game. Lamar Jackson is the highest priced quarterback of the week, but it's only $7,300 high priced. Usually the high priced quarterback is $8K range. So it's a little discount on the highest priced quarterback. We know what Lamar's upside can be. He's been really inaccurate this year and he's struggled, but this is a great matchup against Tennessee. And if people are going to be down on him, then I have no problem stacking him. Everyone's ready to drop Marquise Brown off their season-long their redraft leagues, but I think Marquise Brown is a great play at $5,800. Always has the ability to break the slate, and he's number 2 in the NFL in deep passes seen, but not deep passes completed. Lamar keeps going for him. He keeps missing. Eventually, he's going to hit those passes, and when he does, and we're getting Marquise Brown at under 6K, that's one catch. One catch. A 60-yard bomb is 13 points right there. That's a 2X right there on one catch. He does 2 of those. You're talking 4 or 5X. That's a real good way to break that slate. Mark Andrews under 5K. He's never under 5K. And if Lamar Jackson gets going, he really does like to limit his target tree to Brown and Andrews. He has been throwing to Willie Snead, but I'm not throwing Willie Snead in a GPP. If I'm playing a GPP, I'm going to spend the extra $1,300 for Hollywood Brown against a team that sucks against the pass. And I'm going to run that play back because you always want to run it back if you can. I'm going to run it back with Derrick Henry. I just think everyone's going to be on Kamara as a high-end running back. Everyone's going to be on Dalvin Cook's going to have 1,000,000% ownership. Great. So give me Derrick Henry at what could be a low ownership. Guy's got, he doesn't catch a ton of passes. I always complain about that, but every time I say that, I look up, he's got 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, I'll take the 30 points right there, no problem. And I think that's how Tennessee's going to try to control this game. Baltimore gives up a ton of yards on the ground. You beat Baltimore by running against them. Tennessee wants to slow the game down. They're going to run. Baltimore's going to throw. I think this is a lineup that we can use that's going to have a high potential for points, and I don't think a lot of people are going to be on it. Sorry, Gouda, I just stopped and I didn't give you a natural area. Is there a stack on that you're looking at that stands out to you, or one that I'm missing? We'll hit a little bit on all these stacks, but I don't want to just run through all of them.
Actually, there's 2 things. So So your stack. Sorry, I'm just trying to read it in there. So the
All right,
stacks
I've
that
got
you. That's okay. So the
Baltimore,
stacks that you
Minnesota,
have in
Pittsburgh.
there.
Yeah.
So I've actually been looking at the Cowboys this week. Believe it or not. I think coming off of the bye, Dalton's a better quarterback than what we've seen. We've got a track record with him. We know what we can do. We touched on how bad the defense is and what's going to happen. Or what we anticipate happening, I should say. We don't know what's going to happen. We're anticipating what's going to happen. And sort of actually, I was just working on this one too, intertwining it with something you mentioned earlier in the stream on just saying YOLO and throwing Cook, Kamara, and Derrick Henry in a lineup. We actually can make that work with a Cowboy stack. And it actually works well to what I wrote up earlier today in the Pivot and Leverage article about if you want to try to be, a little contrarian or gain some leverage with using the Vikings, Dalvin Cook with the Cowboys passing game. So, if you're saying, all right, we're going to throw Kamara, Cook, and Derrick Henry in there, we're going to take the top three running backs and we're going to piece everything else together. If you're using Dalton in there, you got to be looking at. You'll have to get Gallup in there because you're going to need those savings. And I do prefer Lamb to Cooper this week. I think Lamb's got the Viking secondary is just bad to begin with, but I think Lamb's got the best matchup in there, and I think he's the most explosive out of any of them. I think he's so much more talented than what Amari Cooper is, and I think Lamb's the number one receiver there next year. And to be honest, if they can figure out a way, I wouldn't be surprised next year if we see Lamb and Gallup as the 1 and 2, and Cooper's not even on that team anymore. I think Dallas got to change things up a little bit, and Cooper could just be the odd man out there. But regardless with that, if you look in there, you don't have very much wiggle room with what you're looking at. And then you make the decision kind of on the defensive end. You want to just, really punt it and just get as much as you can spend and go with the Jets, or do you use the Falcons because you have a little bit better potential success there? And then really your decision comes right. What value receiver am I going to look at, in that range? If you're going with the Falcons, you're looking at that $4,200 range. I guess T.Y. Hilton is somewhat intriguing only because of his name. He hasn't shown much this year. And I don't have any reason to believe that he'll do anything, but sometimes a name is worth a shot. And then you're just looking at some of the guys we spoke about before. You got, Keelan Cole there, with Chenault out, has some potential. You've got KJ Hamler there that if Miami can put up some points, maybe Denver's, passing there a bit. And then you got, same thing, Jakeem Grant as well, who we know he's got some upside, and all that. And even too, another guy to consider that's down there as well at 3,300. If you're really looking for a punt, is Denzel Mims. His target share is going up. This is a game that the Jets should trail pretty substantially. And listen, if last week he had 8 targets, he caught 4 for 62. If he has that output with touchdown, you're sitting damn pretty for 3,300. And even on the flip side, if you just say, you know what, I'm just going to take as much as I can. I'm going to use the Jets there as a defensive play, and give myself as much as I can spend at wide receiver. Well, now you're getting up there to one of our favorite guys, Michael Pittman Jr. You can throw him in there, or you even got the ability then, if weather isn't too bad, you can get Jalen Reagor in there. And, same thing. I think Reagor is definitely the most talented guy in Philly. Carson Wentz is leaving a lot to be desired, so that could hinder Reagor's upside a little bit. But again, you've got a good play there and a good matchup. Again, you can pivot there at 4,300 even to Brashad Perryman. A lot of what I said about Mims is going to apply to Perryman. He looked fantastic with Flacco there last week, scoring 2 touchdowns, getting 7 targets. And, there's something to be said. A lot of people forget Perryman and Flacco played for a number of years in Baltimore. Perryman left a lot to be desired those years, and, really only started putting it together, in Tampa Bay. So, but there's definitely a connection there with Perryman and Flacco. So maybe that's something to even look at and exploit on a very, very, very low ownership with with the rest of this lineup, you've got quite the intriguing GPP lineup. And let's face it, you got a lot of upside in that Dallas passing game, as bad as they've been this year.
You sure do. No, I like that. I think if you want to go Eifert in that position too as tight end, if you're willing to spend all the way down, you can move up to Valdez-Scantling, who is a super high-end wide receiver. I like him as I've got him as one of my one-off plays, leverage one-offs, because he leads the NFL in yards per catch. He's had 3 touchdowns the last 2 weeks. Rodgers is looking for him. I mean, 15 points is definitely not out of the realm of possibility. 20 points is a big game for him, and so you could absolutely pull that off. I like that. I went the other way. I went with the Vikings end of this game. If you go with the Vikings end of this game, I mean, Thielen is as cheap as he's been all year. Jefferson's as cheap as he's been in a month. Mm-hmm. You've got a full price on Cousins, and I think actually leverage is the Minnesota passing game on this one, because I just think that Dalvin Cook's going to be the highest owned running back, and a lot of people don't differentiate like where they should go, cash versus GPP. They're like, Dalvin Cook's a great play, I'm going to play Dalvin Cook, and a lot of the general public doesn't think to try to leverage the field, and I think the passing game's where the leverage is going to be. Mm-hmm. I do like Amari Cooper because I think Dalton is going to have trust in the veteran. And I also think 5,400 is just too cheap for a guy of his talent. But I agree. I understand all 3 of the Dallas wide receivers are going to be in my GPP pool, because I think any one of them could pop off. And if you use this lineup right here, use the Cousins, Thielen, Cooper lineup with, again, the Falcons defense, and we just use the Falcons as a base defense for our GPP builds, and we can play around with it. But it seems to be the team that we like to go to. You can do a lot of stuff here. Obviously we're not going to go down Dalvin Cook in this situation. You could still go Derrick Henry in this situation. You could still hit some other running backs, not a high end, but there's a different combination you can make. I mean, you still have $5,300 per player if you want to run a Dalvin Cook like Marquise Brown, a secondary stack. And we love secondary stacks. And I think especially if Derrick Henry is running it back and you're running back with Brown, I just think not a lot of people out there. You spend down at tight end in this position, and just put Logan Thomas in there is that default, and we can play up and down with that. That leaves you a decent amount of that's $6,700 for a running back. And I happen to love James Conner as a leverage play at running back. He's in our leverage pool because everyone's going to be playing Pittsburgh passing game. Conner hasn't gotten a lot of work the last few weeks, but Jacksonville's terrible against the run. You throw Conner in there, I like the lineup quite a bit too. So you're pulling those plays, and you get that leverage where everyone's doing one thing, we do the other thing. If everyone's on the Pittsburgh passing game, and I've got them as a play this week, you just go the other end of that. And James Conner, Jacksonville's terrible there. And that's, you've got your secondary stack with Brown and Henry. You've got your leverage play in Conner. You've got it comfortable with, and a defense. I mean, this is how you can pull together a lineup. You want to spend more money on a defense, go from Cooper to Gallup, or Cooper to CD Lamb. You can spend up a tight end or spend up defense, but this is where you start your build, and you can kind of go from there. And I like that position on that. We talked about Pittsburgh being a potential. I think, I don't want to spend too much time on it, because I do think you have to have exposure to the Pittsburgh passing game, but I think they're going to be the chalkiest of all the passing games this week. Maybe, I don't know. I think New Orleans Atlanta is a funky game. I'm not even touching it for right now for the purpose of this conversation, but I do think there are going to be some people who are going to try to get cute with that game. I think ownership's going to be all over the place, but Pittsburgh, I think, will be the chalkiest game. And Jacksonville's got 3 run backs with DJ Chark's too cheap at $5,700. Pittsburgh's not great against deep passes. Conley and Cole also really cheap, decent run backs if you want to spend down. And as you can see, with $5,800 left per player, again, Logan Thomas in there. And we're not going to build entire lineups with everyone. Just, we like to show you those examples of how run backs work. You've got quite a bit of money where you could spend up big time. Fine, I'll do it, because once I do it, I want to see what it turns out. But I mean, right? Like it gets to the point you're like, oh, what if I forget to do this later on? And again, throw Henry into every lineup, but I'm going to put him into a couple lineups now, just so we can see what we do. Yeah. And okay, if you throw Dalvin Cook into this lineup, you got $3K left. Chris Conley is $3K. It's a second run back on a Pittsburgh stack. This is if you want to go all in on an onslaught for this game, but you could do that. You throw Conley in there at $3K, and you've got yourself a double run back. If this game shoots out a little bit, if the Pittsburgh back-end defense really is as weak as it has shown, you've got 2 super high-end running backs. You've got one chalkier one a little riskier. You've got a lot of exposure to the passing game here. To me, that's a decent GPP type of a lineup. And that's how you could maybe play a chalky Pittsburgh stack while getting leverage on Henry, leverage with Conley into a Pittsburgh stack. And that's where you get the ownership. Because remember, individual plays don't matter so much as the cumulative ownership. And the average cumulative ownership of GPP winning lineups is about 140%. So if you've got Claypool at 25%, I think that might be high for him. But, that's fine because you're going to have Conley at 3%. So that averages out to about, 14% a player. That's a really reasonable area because you're talking 14%. You're talking 126% if that's the case on your team, if everyone's at 14%. So that's not such a big deal. And you can make that work. Henry will be sub 10%. Cook will be 25%. Again, that'll average out to where you need to be. And if you go 142%, 150%, that's fine for ownership. You don't want to be at 200% ownership because that just means you're playing way too big chalk, and you're not going to get any chance to move up in a GPP if you're playing with those players. One guy scores great, everyone has them. You want those guys like Derrick Henry who are really going to move you up the field, especially a high end guy like Henry. You just chime in if I'm hitting anything that doesn't work. I just want to try to run through GPPs.
On a thing like that, another option too that is always interesting. I mean, I think a consideration on kind of an interesting stack is Miles Sanders, Nick Chubb type of thing, especially if we do have weather issues in Cleveland again, and also too just because you mentioned New Orleans and Atlanta. Again, Taysom Hill, we're anticipating some chalk with Taysom Hill, especially at quarterback and all that. But I think if you want to get contrarian or leverage in that game, it's pretty simple. Just use Matt Ryan at quarterback instead.
It's so smart.
I mean, sometimes when you're thinking of leverage, it's not getting cute. Sometimes it's just an obvious play. Because if Taysom Hill is going to be that chalky at quarterback on DraftKings, well, just go to Matt Ryan. He's going to be, people are going to be stacking it and taking the 4,800 price tag so they can do other things. Use Matt Ryan. We've seen what Ryan is doing with Julio healthy and back. And, again, Matt Ryan, any week, he can be the highest scoring quarterback on a slate. These teams love to run their shootouts, as we've seen multiple times in the past. There's a high probability for that, especially. So using Matt Ryan is an easy leverage point for not doing anything different.
Yeah, I think people tend to think that you have to get like really wacky to be contrarian and to have leverage. I mean, think about what we've been leveraging a lot of the last few weeks. We've been leveraging with a Pat Mahomes stack. Like we used Pat Mahomes against the Jets, and no one was on. He was sub 10%, and they went off. Same thing against Carolina. He was sub 10%, and he went off. Like every week, we're going, let's do that. And speak to that. That brings us to this one that we talked about prior to getting on the air. Is no one's talking about the Green Bay passing offense. Like I feel like no one's talking about it. That's a great thing. Like it's Aaron freaking Rodgers. I get that the Colts have a fairly decent defense, but we've talked in previous live streams that they've played nobody this year, and when they do play someone decent, they've given up points. They've gotten into some shootouts. That game against Detroit, where I was like, it'd be a terrible game. The Colts have a great defense, and Gouda was like, slow down, big boy. Like they've not played anyone this year, and Detroit put up a lot of points on them. And Colts can play back too. Like that's the thing about the Colts. They do have the ability to play back. They don't have tons of great fantasy options, which is weird, but they can play back against a team with the variety of players that they have. They have the three-headed monster at running back, and every week it seems a new wide receiver seems to emerge for the team. And you got Trey Burton running his Wildcat goal line carries. So, they're not their best stacking option, but they are a team that can keep another team in the game. And let's not forget, this game, if I'm not mistaken, has the second highest point total on the slate. It's a 51-point total, I believe, right now. The points have to come from somewhere, and Aaron Rodgers is beating up on everybody. So if people are going to be down on Rodgers, and I do think this will not be a very widely owned stack, go put Aaron Rodgers in your lineup. I think Aaron Jones, Colts defense is really good against the run. Aaron Jones disappointed last week. Great, use him. And if you don't want to use him, pull him out and put in Devontae Adams, who's really expensive this week. I think there's not going to be a lot of people playing Devontae Adams this week, and at $8,600, he's pricey, and I get it. But if you don't want to play a running back, and running backs and receivers and quarterbacks, the percentage that they have scored 25 more points each, a quarterback, running back, receiver from the same game is less than 1% of the time. Now it is a pass catching running back like Aaron Jones who would get you there. But generally, you're going to get your most 25-point correlation plays with quarterbacks and receivers. And so great, use Adams, and you can use Valdez-Scantling, who is a big-time deep threat, and you can run it back with Michael Pittman, who will be, I think, a fairly popular play this week. Again, we've got him in our cash lineup currently. But that doesn't mean we can't use him in a GPP. There's points will be scored, and Pittman looked great last week. And you run Rodgers with the double stack, you've still got $5,700 left per player. Again, you throw in, Logan Thomas. And again, that's not to say Logan Thomas should be in every single lineup, but that's just about where we're at. Again, you've got $6,500 flipping dollars player to play with. I mean, that is Derrick Henry. That is Dalvin Cook. And no, that's not. We can't run Jakeem Grant in there. Fine, I can't use Dalvin Cook. I can use another high-end wide receiver. You could run, Keenan Allen in the flex, and that still leaves you plenty of money left for something. You go down to Pirine.
Adrian Peterson.
Yes, there was a running back at 4K this week. You run Adrian Peterson, who's a great leverage play. I mean, this is doable. And you can still look at the high-end plays. You got an Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams stack with Derrick Henry and Keenan Allen. That's crazy.
Yeah, and you actually this game for this slate, for the main slate, it's the highest total of the slate.
Okay, so I think the minute the New Orleans game came down 3 points when Taysom Hill was named the starter. So yeah, I think that flipped.
Yeah, that's down to 49.5 now.
Okay.
But yeah, the Colts Packers is the only game over 50. I mean the Chiefs and Raiders are at 57, but since they're Sunday night, I'm not counting it for this one. But yeah, they're the only game over 50 right now.
Wow. So and if they're going to be underowned, I mean, if you watch my GPP strategy article or videos, you watch an article. If you watch my video, it's on our YouTube channel. Just look up Doug Shane, like, share, subscribe, click the notification icon so you know we have more videos coming out. But if you watch my GPP strategy article, find a game that's going to score a lot of points and play those guys. That's the strategy. So do that. I think that's a great strategy to have. All right, we are pushing up time that we want to spend, but I want to talk about just a couple other stacks just so we can see them. Here, we kind of like a Charger stack because they're playing the Jets. The Jets suck. I've currently on my cash on our pool. I don't know who the run back would be. I would guess Perryman or Mims are the guys you don't want to spend too high on stack there, but I do think that running the passing game. I also think, as his article this week, he has a leverage play article, as we spoke about. Kalen Ballage is a good leverage play. If you just want to run him as a single player, run him solo against the Jets, I do think the work's going to be there. If he gets in the end zone, he could be looking at 20 points for $5,600. That's a really strong play. And then I like the football team. I think the football team's good. Not good, but good for fantasy. I think, Alex Smith has been throwing a ton. McKissick's going to be on the field. He's going to get his 10 or so targets. McLaurin's a beast. And while Washington hasn't given up a lot to wide receivers, T. Higgins has played special. He's getting a lot of targets, still under 6K. Burrow seems to favor him. Even if you don't run T. Higgins, you want to spend down to A.J. Green or up to Tyler Boyd. I mean, I think T. Higgins is the safest play of the bunch. And you still have a ton of money left over. I might run Logan Thomas instead of McKissick in this stack. But there's options to run here. And
I mean, even with Washington, I mean, one of the plays that I really liked last week was a Chubb and Hunt stack. I think with Washington, I think we're getting to the point where, it's kind of not that Washington will ever be chalky, but just sort of as a real different type of play. I think Gibson and McKissick, they're both seeing enough snaps. They're seeing enough usage that you can stack those guys together. I mean, because let's face it, McKissick is really their number 2 receiver there, for all intents and purposes. I think he's only number 2 in the NFL to like Devontae Adams in targets the past 3 weeks, like something just absurd. So even, if you think Burrow's going to pass it a ton and since he may have to play catch up a little bit, or it's just going to be a back and forth game, you can use Burrow, one of Higgins and Boyd, and, throw McKissick and Gibson in there. You got 4 value guys and, you got a lot of room to do things. It's just kind of, again, it's not a very strong play because Gibson can be a little game flow dependent. So you could get taken out of it pretty easily. But at the same token, if we see what they both did last week, they both shattered their price tag last week. So you can have those games where they both can be extremely productive in the right type of game.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. I was throwing the Cam Sims stats as well. He has 9 targets the last 2 weeks. I think he's starting to develop some trust in Alex Smith. So if you have $3,300 and you don't like Denzel Mims, you don't want to spend for Chris, he's a one-off kind of a guy. I wouldn't use him in a stack. He's a name just to keep in mind. And the other stack that I'm looking at this week is the Houston Texans. People are going to avoid the Patriots because they're the Patriots, but they just haven't been great this year. I have no problem running a Watson, Fuller, Cook stack against Jacoby Myers. If you don't love the idea of using Fuller, you just pull him out, right? You just pull him out. You still have 6,200 to play. You run just Watson, Cooks, Myers. If he starts to score a little bit, New England's going to have to throw. I do think Damian Harris is in play as well. He's a little banged up, but if he plays, I mean, the guy's had 100 yards in half his start so far, and you beat Houston on the ground. Houston is terrible against the run. Yep. So you could run Damian Harris in a stack here. He just won't catch a lot of passes, and I don't like to use that as much because I want a real high volume. But if he gets 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, I mean, you're talking 25 points for under 6K. That's not bad. So that's something to think about as well. So those are the stacks that we're looking at. And again, you get this, it'll post tomorrow as a member of BanksterDFS.com, where you get everything that we do for $3.99 a week. It's a pretty good deal for $3.09 a week. We cover baseball, football, basketball, coming in 1 month. But we do have our first basketball article out. Justin Amy put out an article getting you ready for the season. Hockey, which I know Sean Goodwin's working on hockey. If they expect a January 1st return or somewhere in mid-January, we're going to have a ton of hockey. We're still doing PGA. We do tennis. We do NASCAR. We do lots of MMA. College sports, college football, college basketball comes back next Wednesday. We cover that as well. A little bit of esports, sports card trading, sports betting. I don't think I'm missing anything. And all that's for $3.99 a week at BanksterDFS.com. Articles, player pools, and the best Slack chat in the business. Check us out on YouTube. Just look me up, Doug Shane. Like, share, subscribe. Click that notification icon. Let us so we know, or not we know, so when we're posting new stuff. We are live every single Friday night at 7 o'clock Eastern with our kickoff show, and Sunday mornings, 11:30 in the morning, me, Gouda, and a host of friends join you with a look at the live before lock leading up to kickoff for week 11 this week. For Michael Gudadero at The Big Gouda on Twitter, I am Doug Shane at Bankster17. Check us out, Bankster.